So, Dharma talk. What is a Dharma talk? You may or may not have heard that word before. Dharma. It is originally rooted in Buddhism, and it kind of describes this idea. Well, it's used primarily to express the teachings of the Buddha. Except in this sort of context, because we're doing a meditation retreat that is based, we're using a technique that's based in Buddhism. We're using it to mean just a transmitting of the teachings in general. And what's so cool about Dharma talks is that they are really the primary way in which all of this information has been passed on from person to person over thousands of years. So much of this Buddhism, it's a spoken tradition, transmission of spoken word from one teacher to one student. And so the purpose of a Dharma talk is for us as teachers to express some of the wisdom, the learnings, the knowledge, the things that we have come across for you guys. And it's kind of, there's two sort of things that we're gathering throughout this retreat. There's knowledge and there's wisdom. And what we are giving to you now would be more what we would call knowledge. Many of these are our experiences, things that we have experienced along this path of meditation and retreats and everything else. And so when we present it to you, it kind of comes to you guys as knowledge, as somebody else's experience. And this can be very useful, but ultimately these types of things you will have to experience yourself. And maybe you already have experienced some of them. So that's the purpose of what we're doing here. And there's no need to remember all of this, as obviously nobody has the ability to take notes. We are recording, so you can refer to it later. I want you to treat this time as a meditation. No different from what we've been doing. Listen to our words, see how you react, see if any emotions arise, any thoughts. Let them pass away and then continue to be present. That's all. So Anna and I, we're going to do it a little bit non-traditionally. We're going to split up this talk and we're going to kind of go back and forth about a topic. And this topic, this idea that we wanted to discuss with you guys today is, why do we practice meditation? Why do we practice, right? This word practice, we've been throwing it around a lot. So maybe you have some thoughts about that already, why it is you came to this retreat, why you're trying all of this stuff. Maybe you want to be happier. Maybe you want to, stop being angry. Maybe you want to become enlightened. Maybe. But there's a problem with approaching it this way. There's a problem with coming to anything, but especially to meditation, with a specific place that you're trying to get to, a specific goal. So for me, to share a little personal story, I came to meditation originally as a way to help me focus better. I was using it for this purely sort of performance-based reason. I was an engineer at the time, studying engineering, and I heard all this stuff about how this thing, mindful meditation, that people were starting to do with the apps and everything, it could help you focus. And I actually didn't have a particularly hard time focusing at the time, but I figured in such a sort of competitive university, college environment, it would always be good to be able to focus more, because then I could finish stuff quicker, move on to the next thing. And so, yeah, it sounded great. Let's focus better. And kind of at the at the same time as I was doing this, I was really into mountaineering, climbing tall mountains with lots of gear and lots of training. And I kind of was noticing throughout this, well, I didn't start noticing till later, but throughout this process of climbing mountains and studying engineering, it was kind of always about getting to the next thing, always about achieving that next goal. And with mountaineering especially, I mean, literally the entire purpose, as some people could say, was to get to the top of the mountain. And so you do all this stuff, you know, you wake up at 2 in the morning and you're in a tent dug into the snow at 4,000 meters and freezing cold, and there's all these very uncomfortable experiences that you have to go to, and you push yourself very physically, and you're trying to get to the top of this mountain. And it was funny because when you got to the top of the mountain, which happened sometimes, most of the time for me, you know, there was this feeling of total bliss, of joy, and it was beautiful. And then you start climbing down, and life sort of comes back pretty quickly. And you immediately start thinking, what's the next mountain? What's the next thing I have to do? And that would happen, and then, you know, even worse, sometimes the universe would get in the way. Sometimes there'd be a storm. Sometimes the terrain would be too dangerous to cross over that particular day. And so then you would have put in sometimes months of preparation, and for what? You didn't even get there. So I was noticing that my life was very goal-based, and I was taking this into my meditation as well. And the meditation became difficult too, because I would look around and I'd say, well, yeah, I felt a little more focused on this day, but then something else happened and now I feel very unfocused. And so, like, why am I doing this? So, you know, clearly this is not a groundbreaking insight. Most of us have kind of heard this cliche of enjoying the journey, not the destination, right? Enjoying the process. Most of us have heard this, but how often are we really applying it? And to what things are we applying it? So the sort of central quote here, the thing that a quote that I believe Anna found one time that we both really like, that I think applies to many types of practice, but especially meditation, is this: we don't practice to be perfect. We practice to meet ourselves just as we are. Right? We don't practice to be perfect. We practice to meet ourselves just as we are. So, how do we do that? How do we find ourselves as we are instead of trying to move forward into this perfection always? So one way that we can look at this is this idea of an intention versus a goal. So a goal is something that can be achieved. I got to the top of the mountain. You know, I am much more focused than I was before. It's something where there's like an end, a boundary that you can cross over, which means you can also fail. An intention would be more of a direction that you want to head in, or an attitude that you want to have while you do something. So, for example, rather than have a goal for the practice, you can kind of use, for meditation practice, you can use this idea of intention, and you can use this quote to say, what if my intention is just to learn more about where I am now? Right? What state I'm in, what emotions I'm feeling, what's going on with me now? What if that's your intention for practice? And the reason why an intention is important, and particularly this type of intention, is because it's very, very hard to know where we want to go next if we are trying to meditate to improve ourselves, which is a fine reason. It's why most of us are doing it. In order to know where to go next, we need to know where we are right now, right? So, this is very obvious in some contexts. Look at if you're trying to get somewhere, if you're using Google Maps, right, and you're trying to get somewhere, and you're asking for directions, a direction to head in to get there. You can't get a direction unless you know where you are right now. You need to know your current location. So that's what this practice is about in some sense. Understanding where we are now, and that's going to help us with getting wherever it is we might want to get next. So, intention, direction, and an attitude. So, if we go back to the mountaineering example, how could we make the situation a little bit more Buddhist, a little bit more mindful while we're mountaineering? So I would say if a Buddhist monk was mountaineering, he might say, let's just start heading up the mountain and we'll see what happens. And we'll do it patiently and calmly. And you could do that. I think definitely most of my old mountaineering friends would not subscribe to that, and it's sort of counter to the way that the culture around the whole activity is set up. But you could do that. And really, it's about finding a balance, right? It's not about let's only come at things with intentions. Let's only come at things with goals. And this is something that took me a while to figure out, because I was very goal-oriented at first. Then I learned about this whole thing of intentions, and I thought, oh shoot, I've been doing it all wrong. Like, why would I even do something like mountaineering if it's always going to be about the goal? And now I kind of realize, like everything, there's a balance. How do you balance between goals and intentions? Because goals can still be useful. Goals can still get us to places where we feel we want to be, something that we want to experience. But the really big key here is this idea of attaching to the results of whatever we're going for. So if, for example, we said we're going to try to climb the mountain, but if the weather gets in the way, then maybe we have to stop and turn around. That's not attaching to the actual result, right? So much easier said than done, but that's the entire point of practice. That's the entire difficulty of this, is noticing first, understanding where you are right now with where you're attached to things, where you feel like you have something that you really need to accomplish at all costs, and then maybe seeing, can you soften that? Can you still strive while not worrying too much about what the actual end result is? So a lot of this comes down to this idea of expectations. What do we expect to happen in any given situation? And, managing expectations is a huge part of how we practice. And actually, it's completely impossible to have no expectations. Anna and I were in a retreat in Sri Lanka about a year ago, and our teacher was talking about expectations, and then he kind of asked this leading question of like, well, what do we do with expectations? And we were in like a group discussion, and we all kind of thought, oh, well, it's just no expectations. Let's just get rid of them. And he said, no, you can't really do that. You need to have some sort of expectations in order to live your life. Like, you need to expect that you'll be able to find food for lunch, or else you won't actually go when your stomach starts rumbling. Or there's certain things that you need to expect. So what he said instead was this 3-word quote that's really stuck with me ever since, which is, expect the reality. right? If you're going to have expectations, expect the reality. And at first it's like, okay, I expect the reality. How do I know what the reality is? Well, that's the practice, right? The reality is where you are right now, and you are trying to meet yourself with the practice. So as you move forward with this stuff, you'll see that what we're really trying to do is to kind of get away from these personal stories, these biases, these things that we tell ourselves about who we are and what we do, and get closer to this objective universal truth of this is the reality that I can expect from my experience. I'll hand it off to Anna to talk a bit more about this.
Yeah, so these expectations obviously play a big part in this question of why do we practice. It's kind of something we have to address eventually, how we manage these expectations, how do we expect our own reality. My reality is not your reality. I have a different mind, I have a different body. My reality is not the same every day. My reality today is different than tomorrow and the day after. So it's kind of a tricky thing to handle these expectations, but once we look at them, it will actually help us a lot in this question of why do we practice. And if we go deeper into this question to fully answer it, I think it's actually very helpful to look at why don't we practice? Why is it so often that we have to start the practice again, or that we start it at all? It starts a lot with goals, with intentions. Maybe someone brings the practice to us. But as long as I teach now, I encounter that in many different forms and ways, and actually also with my own practice, it took very long time to actually get a constant practice going. And even though I was very excited always about it, different practices, yoga, meditation, doesn't really matter. And I also saw the benefits from it, but somehow the practice loses itself. And then you have to start again and again. So a big reason behind this, why don't we practice, is resistance. So in general in meditation we have quite a few obstacles that we encounter. We won't go into all of them too specific. I want to directly address resistance here. Other obstacles you might face or might have faced in this retreat, like pain, boredom, and you might have even encountered resistance. Maybe sometimes it was a bit harder to get up here, to sit down. Some days it's really easy, some days it's really not easy. And we feel this resistance physically, we're a bit more tense. It's like almost everything is kind of like, don't practice now. But yeah, we kind of want to start this practice. We have an intention. So yeah, I think this resistance is a very interesting thing to look at. And if you understand this resistance, then you can also handle it. You can see where is it coming from. And often it's as easy as the practice is just not fully part of a routine, fully part of your everyday life. And that's why there is resistance. If you make a practice part of your routine, if it's just there with you every day, then there will be less and less resistance, because it's just something you do. You don't even give your mind the idea of resistance, because that's just something you do. It will help with things like intuition. I feel sometimes my intuition is almost not telling me to practice. Like there's like this feeling like, don't do it. But why is this feeling there? It's because it's something that you have to do, or something, there's like a step to it instead of something that is part of you. I have a student of mine, and we're right now doing this 14 days of meditation, where every day you have a certain meditation, and she is slowly getting into her practice, and she has been practicing before a few weeks. We've started together, and like during these 14 days I was like, how's it going, everything okay? And she's like, yeah, but like since I have to do it, I really don't want to do it, and I have a terrible practice, and before it was so good. And I was like, okay, but you know, that's just part of it. That's kind of this first journey of making it part of your life. Because when you start your practice, it usually, from what I got in feedback from what I've experienced myself, it's really good, because we're very used to doing many things and maybe not being that mindful, and then we get this moment where we sit down and we start to breathe, and we experience this like calmness that this breathing brings to us. So usually the first practices are really like, wow, I'm so relaxed, it's awesome. And then the more you do it and you do it, it's like, oh, actually today it's not awesome, and like I couldn't concentrate. And that's what she's been telling me. She's like, I can't concentrate, like my thoughts are all over, and it's just like, since I committed to it, it's horrible. And yeah, this is kind of what this resistance is about, and this is kind of what the practice is doing with you at the beginning. It shows you many different obstacles, because we don't practice to be perfect, but we come and we want to be perfect. It's a big expectation management. We're used to, it depends of the personality type. Some people have it stronger than others, but I think deep down kind of everyone wants to be seen as perfect, and we want to be seen as perfect in front of ourselves the most. We want to sit down and it should flow. So yeah, what helps here is first expectation management, to see maybe you didn't have a good sleep, then expect that you might be a bit tired from meditating and you might have a bit of a struggle there. If you have a lot on your mind and meditation is the last thing you do in your day, there might be a bit more thoughts than the day before. So look at your expectations, and then the one thing that's really breaking the resistance is to do it anyways. It's as simple as that. When you start a practice and you want to bring in consistency, you want to make it part of your routine, you have to practice against the resistance or instead of the resistance. Do it anyways. As simple as that. Okay, so that's kind of the how do we break this? We're not practicing to be perfect, so go in and see how you look not perfect. Totally fine. And yeah, and there's many other things, of course, that help you to establish a practice, and that's kind of the next step, what you look at. So you kind of have to break this resistance, and for that you have many different strategies. Frequency is one of it. The more you practice, the more it becomes part of your routine. Duration, in my experience, is not really a strong part of establishing the practice. At the beginning, it doesn't really matter how long you sit. It's more important that you sit every day, that you make it part of your day. So we often recommend to do it at the same time, at the same place. The danger there is that, like, oh, I'm not at the same place, or I overslept, so I don't do it at all. No excuses. When I talk to my students, I often get like, oh, I didn't do it because of this, I didn't do it because of this and that. It's like, I love love you all, but I really don't care why you don't do it. You don't have to justify it in front of me. Maybe you feel that you have to justify it in front of yourself, but really you don't. You didn't do the practice. That's already done. Just see what you do for the next day. Practice again. Overcome the resistance. Show up again. So it's kind of this thing that we really encounter anywhere in our lives when we do something. When you learn how to play guitar, when you surf, any of the hobbies, it's really about this showing up for it and doing it. And yeah, we just had a funny conversation about that, because I feel I love surfing and I love doing it, but to like take a step back and really look at the technique, or really have like a hard practice, I'm not really into it. I like to surf to enjoy, and that's also a part of how I get better. But in this talk that we listened to, he talked about playing the scales. So when you're playing guitar, you have to practice the chords, the notes, you play the scales. If you don't practice that, you can still play guitar, but often you might get stuck in one level. And of course, there are many people out there who have a very strong natural talent, where maybe not as much practice is necessary, but the practice always helps. It always brings you a step further, a step further, a step further. And that's kind of the same here. And yeah, and enjoy this process and enjoy the pain that it sometimes brings. I remember I had a moment a few years ago in Mexico where I was at this beautiful beach, and I was doing all the things that I really love to do. I was surfing there, I was playing guitar, I did some yoga practice, and I was just in this seemingly very perfect state. But I felt so much pain in it, because I just came out from the worst session ever. I got totally smashed. I got like dragged out with the current, was full of anxiety after. And then I played guitar, and I just learned to play it, and I wanted to sing a song, and I couldn't really sing it because I couldn't really play the chords yet. And then I tried to have conversation with people, and I love Spanish and I love talking, but it was just learning to speak, and I couldn't really communicate. So I was in this midst of chaos in my head, doing all the things I love, but kind of in the midst of the practice. And that's what it can be, and that's how it can present itself to you. But while I was experiencing all this pain, it was kind of this weird balance. I was experiencing all this frustration and this oh, I can't really do anything good yet, but I love it all. I love doing it. I'm right where I want to be, and this is it. And I feel there was a big wave of acceptance there, and this is a big thing that you need to bring into your practice. Accepting of the obstacles that will arise, acceptance of where you are right now, acceptance not to be perfect, and acceptance of impermanence. Everything changes, every day is different than the other. And yeah, this is kind of where the journey is taking you, and on this journey you will also experience a lot of joy and a lot of contentment. So up and down, up and down. And in these up and downs, it's also very important to be proud of yourself and to kind of celebrate the little wins that you get in your practice. Because yeah, there's a lot of benefit to the practice, a lot of struggle, but then there are these moments where you kind of feel something, where there is something, and that's gonna keep you going. And yeah, maybe Colin can tell us a bit more about these little celebrations that can keep us going.
So yeah, there's many different things that happen while you're on this journey. Let's say you're practicing every day, and they start with the small things. And as Anna was saying, celebrating the small things is just as, if not more important than celebrating the big ones. It's how we find the motivation to keep going. So she talks a lot about resistance, routine, that kind of thing. And when you actually look at the way that a habit is formed, a routine, very basic habit psychology, they have these little graphs, and it says like, you need a cue to remember to do the habit, you need to actually do the habit, you need the action, and then finally you need the reward. If you miss that last arrow of a reward, the habit will never be formed, because it's just the way your brain works. Chemically, you want to have that little boost, that feeling, ooh, that just did something, right? So if you're practicing something, if you're practicing scales on guitar over and over and over again, if you're training for mountaineering for months and months and months, and then like you never make it to the top of the mountain, or you never play a song, you're not going to keep doing it. So with meditation, what is that reward? What is that thing that you're getting out of it? So there's the small things. They happen to me every day. There's so many interesting things when you start opening yourself up. Maybe you're talking to a family member and they say something that every other day of the week would have really pissed you off or caused some sort of reaction, and then you actually had just meditated an hour before, and you stop yourself and you kind of think, maybe there's more to this. Maybe I don't have to react in this way. Something as simple as that, and you see many, many of these things throughout the day. Maybe it's while you're eating. Maybe it's like a little piece of food that, before you thought, I really need to have dessert tonight, and then it's, in reality, maybe you didn't have to, and maybe that one time you can resist it. So celebrating these tiny things that are happening. I just learned 30 minutes ago while we were walking around, I learned a completely new thing about the way that I walk, which, I don't know, hard to call that a win because I'm not sure how useful it is yet, but I found it so interesting that I've done God knows how many hours of walking meditation. I've been walking for quite some years, and I noticed something completely different about the way that I shift my feet and my shoulders with each step. So there's always more interesting things to learn. There's always cool things to be discovered, and just keep track of them. Noticing these things is really important. But then actually there are some big wins sometimes too. And you have to be careful, actually, of the big wins. The small wins are easy. They're here, they're there, they're great, celebrate them, and then you kind of forget them. The big wins can be dangerous, but they're very important as well. So when I talk about the big wins, I'm kind of referring to this idea of insights that you may come across along this path. And, an insight, there's a spectrum, of course. You could call the small wins insights, small insights as well, but I'm kind of talking about things that really sort of shake you to the core. And oftentimes these insights are found through very, very insightful states that you enter with your mind. And sometimes they happen on retreats. Sometimes they happen on psychedelics, if you have any experience with that. But it's these things where they sort of change the whole perception of how you thought about something before. And sometimes they're very external, something about the way the universe works. Sometimes they're very internal, something about the way your life has played out. But they can be very powerful moments, and you kind of know when you have them. So how do we actually attain these things, though? Like, how does that process work? So there's a very old classic Zen metaphor of the idea of this practice of meditation as being like trying to settle a pond, right? So you have this pond that is your mind, and when you sit in stillness for a really long time, then the mud and the dirt in the pond and everything kind of settles to the bottom, and then you have clarity, and you can see what's going on in the pond, right? You can see the fish, you can see the bottom of the pond. And so the way that the Zen tradition talks about it is through the stillness, you gain this clarity, and then with these very clear states comes the insights, right? They're the things that are always sitting there at the bottom of the pond, but you can't usually see them because you're going around and you're stirring it up and there's all sorts of things happening. So when I kind of learned about this whole concept of insights, rewind, mountaineer, engineer, very goal-oriented, what did I do? I latched right onto this idea of insight. I started reading in the books of these powerful monks having these insane experiences, and they actually write entire the volumes about these different states of mind and how to achieve them with this many years of practice. And I got very hooked on those ideas. I thought it was super cool. I still think it's pretty cool. But earlier on in my meditation career, that, without me even knowing, that kind of became a goal. It was very subconscious, but I was going to these retreats because during the retreats I was having some really crazy experiences and feeling very deep into some topics, some things that really I couldn't describe to you guys in words, and it was all very exciting. But the thing is, I realized after some time that I was chasing highs. I was just constantly trying to get myself back into this high state to grab onto this thing. And part of it was because I was so obsessed with remembering the insights and applying them. So, my very sort of OCD, need to remember everything side of me kicked in here, and I was faced with this problem of I'm going around and I'm having these really beautiful, insightful moments, and maybe you guys can relate to this. Then, a week or two later, I feel normal again, and I feel like I kind of lost what was happening there. And so what was my engineering solution to this? Just write it all down. Just take excessive notes on everything that I encounter. So I have several different Google Docs of different logs that I used to keep. I still keep some of them. And there was a retreat log where I would write down everything that would happen to me during every retreat. There was a bigger insight log where if I had an insight throughout the day, I would write it down. I was just obsessively collecting and tracking and trying to make sense of all of these things that were happening to me during this time. And in some way, it was working in the sense that I felt like I was getting somewhere with it. I was collecting all these notes, and maybe I was going to write a book one day. Maybe I was going to use them for a Dharma talk, whatever. But really, there was something missing there, and it all kind of came together for me during this retreat in Thailand, when I was really particularly struggling with this, and we had the one-on-one interviews with the monk. So I came up to the head monk and I said, I told him about my whole problem. I said, hey, I'm doing these practices that were there. We were learning a specific practice that was like a Buddhist breath work that brought you into this crazy state. And I said, yeah, I got to level 11 or whatever it was. And he was like, oh, that's great. Yeah, wow, you must be very, blah. And then I was like, look, but I'm having all these experiences, but what? I'm forgetting them all afterwards, and I'm trying to write them down. And how do you deal with this as someone who does this for your whole life? And he just looked at me, and he just said, you don't need to remember them. He said, that's not the point of insights at all. When you have an insight, the whole point is that when you need that lesson, it comes back to you. Basically just said, you don't have to write it down. So that was a very powerful moment for me, and I stopped some of my logs. I still keep up with a few of them, but I have since started to realize that what he said is really true. Is that when you have these really deep moments, they should be appreciated for what they are in that moment, and then you really don't need to grasp onto them, right? We're talking so much about meeting ourselves where we are. If in that moment where we are is on day 4 of a retreat in a really intense experience, awesome. enjoy it, right? But it's not always going to be that way. Life is going to keep moving on, and you're going to have amazing experiences. You're going to have really difficult experiences. And it's all about just staying with all of those, not trying so obsessively to be cleaning the pond all of the time, trying to be clear all of the time. That was another phase I went through. Because in the end, you know, there's rain, there's wind that are going to blow leaves into your pond, and there's all sorts of stuff that's going to happen. But the practice is to be still sometimes, is to stay aware, is to know how to let this awareness develop, let the awareness apply itself throughout your life, notice when it applies itself, celebrate those times, and then just keep going with it. And this mentality, for me at least, has been much more helpful and has put so much less pressure on me, especially in a retreat setting, to get somewhere, to do something, and just to be, just to understand, where am I right now?
Yeah, so that's kind of it. That's why we practice. Not to be perfect, not to have as many insights as possible. We practice to be, and to be happier, to live this life in a more conscious way, to be more present. That's everything you will get from the practice, and that's why we do it. Easy. Why we wanted to talk about this, why we wanted to point this out, is because there's such a big value to this practice, and that's so important to understand why you practice. Because practice is really a chance for you to experience all what you experience in your life every day in kind of like a practice run. So, like we did yesterday with the little thought exercise, the labeling, good, bad, neutral, that's happening constantly, all the time within you. And sometimes you notice, but most of the time we don't even know. Like, our brain is making that automatically. It's all like system, because there's so many inputs, so much going on. So thank God it's doing some stuff on its own there, because if we had to control all of that, it would not go well. But a lot of these things are so programmed from growing up, from society, from people around us, that they're happening, and that's actually not really our true nature, how we would want it to happen, or how we would want our life to unfold. And with all these programs running, there's tons of reactions, and sometimes we are a bit aware of the reactions, and a lot of the time we're not, and we're just reacting. We're getting in a mood, we're reacting to other people, and all this is happening, and at one moment we're waking up in all this, and we're so confused, and we don't even feel ourselves anymore. So the practice is this big, big chance to experience all that. And it really is a chance, because even if you have a bad practice, or especially if you have a bad practice, whatever that is, that coming from a judgment that you post on it yourself anyways, but if the practice is challenging or difficult, that's actually where the value is. Like, that's where you look at stuff, that's where you figure something out, like, oh, I'm so frustrated of all these thoughts, and then suddenly you're like, oh, I'm getting frustrated because I have thoughts. So when is this happening actually in life? And next time it is happening in life, maybe you have this, oh, wait, I'm just get frustrated because of a thought. I just practice that I don't have to do that. So slowly, this is evolving. When I talked to Kolin about this. I was writing a manual for it, and he gave me a wonderful example about boredom. So boredom is kind of constantly present in our lives, and that's why everyone is trying to keep busy, to distract ourselves, to do things that we love, to meet people, to eat, whatever. Input, 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 so that we don't get bored. So practicing to be with boredom and actually be okay with it is a wonderful thing you can do in your meditation practice. And you can do it with your breath. And how beautiful is it that you can just sit with your breath and you slowly learn to get curious about the breath. Where do I find it? Where is it everywhere? And sometimes you even get excited because you found like, oh, like I feel my breath in this area. I would have never thought about this. So the practice can teach you how to be excited about something like the breath that you would have never looked at. And then you take this with you in your life. And if you can be excited about your breathing, then really nothing can ever bore you again. You just sit and watch yourself breathing and everything is good, you know? And this is what we want from the practice. This is what we get from the practice. It helps us to just live life in every moment, present, and it's helping us to detach from having distractions. We can just be in any moment, and we can use the practice to learn about what is happening in our lives, how we are reacting, what is arising, how can we deal with it. And that's why it's such a valuable thing. And yeah, that's why we keep on going, whether we know sometimes if we're doing it right or not. It doesn't really matter. You're just practicing. The question often arises, am I doing it right? There's really no right and wrong. I mean, if you maybe sit here and tell yourself you hate yourself, so that's maybe not doing it right. But in general, there is no right and wrong. You're just practicing. You're just observing. And to know if you're doing it right, you see in life. Like Kolin said, if you have a phone call from a family, that's a super good indicator if you stay calm with that. Yeah, the practice worked. If you're in line and not impatient anymore about paying as the next one, but you're just standing and being present, that's when you see the practice works. And yeah, in the end, that's what we really want from life. If you talk to anyone, everyone is always thriving for balance. We all have our ups and downs. We all thrive for balance. Sometimes we get it, sometimes we don't get it. There's this really important knowing that balance is awesome and it's important, and that's where we're going. But to know balance is never permanent, because nothing in life is. Everything is moving. Nature is moving constantly. Time is moving. Our bodies, everything is always changing. And even if you're in a perfect state for a very, very long time, eventually there's going to be a little down or a little up. And yeah, this is what kind of the practice is teaching us, that that's okay, because it doesn't have to be perfect. We just want to know where we are, and that's kind of what the practice can give us. Because like Kolin said, the pond will eventually get dirty again, because it's in nature. A lot of things happen, a lot of influences. But if we can be patient with it, if we can accept that and just keep on practicing to make it clear again, then nothing can really stop us from finding this balance again. So yeah, keep that with you. Maybe reflect a bit while you're practicing. Thought of not being perfect, just to meet yourself. So maybe come into comfortable meditation seat for a few minutes and just close your eyes and just let these words reflect a bit onto yourself.